season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
And the trade mill and the poor law, they're still in full vigor, I presume?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, from what you said at first, I was afraid that something had happened to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
I don't think you quite understand us, sir. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth.
Why?
Because it is at Christmas time that want is most keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What can I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, sir, that is my answer. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. Those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there.
And some would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, it's not my business.
Isn't it, sir?
No. It is enough for a man to understand his own business without interfering with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
What have we just watched?
Well, that was an excerpt from a movie called A Christmas Carol. It's an adaptation from the book by the celebrated Victorian author Charles Dickens. In the opening scenes, we get a very clear picture of its main character, one Ebenezer Scrooge. On the one hand, Scrooge is a miser. He abhors spending money. And on the other hand, Scrooge is also a hater. He abhors his fellow human beings. So you can imagine Scrooge cheerfully counting his gold coins while listening to the desperate cries of starving children. So in short, Scrooge as being a miser and Scrooge as being a hater seem to go hand in hand.
What is the Scrooge stereotype?
The Scrooge stereotype is a generalization based on the peculiarities of Scrooge's personality. The stereotype says that if you're one type of person, namely a miser, then you will also be another type of person, namely a hater. The one implies the other. So suppose you look to see who is a miser and who is a hater. According to the Scrooge stereotype, most people would be both misers and haters, or neither misers nor haters. Only a few people would be a miser but not a hater, or a hater but not a miser. Now, is the Scrooge stereotype true or false? On the one hand, stereotypes sometimes do have a kernel of truth, but on the other hand, sometimes stereotypes are oversimplified. So the purpose of our research is to explore this issue scientifically. Now, Scrooge is certainly a rich and interesting literary character, and the story of his redemption is certainly a heartening tale, but it's unclear whether his fictional personality should be used as a guide to personality generally. It might be the same, or it might not.
What would the Scrooge stereotype look like in the general population?
Okay, to answer this question, we first need to make an important clarification. Personality is not so much about being one sort of person as it is being more or less one sort of person. So certainly there are misers who never spend, and conversely there are squanderers who never save. But most people are neither misers nor squanderers. Instead, most people fall somewhere in between these two extremes. Moreover, there's no sharp dividing line between misers like Scrooge and everybody else. Everybody falls somewhere on the spectrum. So, some people prefer to save more and others prefer to spend more. But it's a continuous distribution with most people in the middle. In the lingo, most personality characteristics are traits rather than types. That's to say, they vary by degree rather than differ in kind. And the same goes for the other aspect of Scrooge's personality. There may be haters who abhor their fellow human beings, and there may be lovers who absolutely adore all of them. But again, most people fall somewhere in between. That is to say, some people are more anti-socially inclined, whereas other people are more pro-socially inclined. Okay, so bearing all this in mind, the Scrooge stereotype in the general population becomes the following. The more you prefer to save, the more anti-socially inclined you will tend to be. Or conversely, the more you prefer to spend, the more pro-socially inclined you will tend to be. The correlation may not be perfect, but it will be present.
So,
What are your hypotheses in this research?
Well, we have two hypotheses. Our first hypothesis is more straightforward, and our second hypothesis, well, that's a bit more subtle. Okay, our first hypothesis is that not only is the Scrooge stereotype false, but it's actually backwards. Okay, the Scrooge stereotype says the more people prefer to save, the more antisocially inclined they will be. But we predict precisely the opposite. The more people prefer to save, the more pro-socially inclined they will be. Or otherwise put, the more people prefer to spend, the more antisocially inclined they will be. Again, there will be exceptions, but we expect this correlation to hold overall. Why do we make this prediction? Well, here we rely on some reasoning by the distinguished philosopher Thomas Nagel in his book, The Possibility of Altruism. In brief, Nagel argues that the virtue of prudence and the virtue of altruism are intertwined. How? Well, both require you to reason impartially. By being prudent, say by saving rather than spending, you postpone your enjoyment, regardless of what you currently want. By being altruistic, say by acting pro-socially rather than anti-socially, you serve the needs of others, again, regardless of what you currently want. So in both cases, you have a reason to act that goes against your immediate desires. So Nagel argues that the same sorts of people, namely people who are responsive to reason, will tend to be both prudent and altruistic. In our terms, this means that people who prefer to save will be more inclined to be pro-social. Now, our second hypothesis, the more subtle one, has to do with timing. Some outcomes occur sooner, other outcomes occur later. People who prefer to spend and people who prefer to save may be more concerned with one outcome as opposed to the other. We predict that people who prefer to save will be most pro-social when thinking about future outcomes. Moreover, we even allow for the possibility that when thinking about present outcomes, people who prefer to spend may be as pro-social or maybe even more pro-social than people who prefer to save. Why? Well, when one spends, one is generally thinking about present outcomes as opposed to future outcomes. However, when one saves, one is generally thinking about future outcomes as opposed to present outcomes. So people who prefer to spend may be more present-oriented in general, and people who prefer to save, well, they're liable to be more future-oriented in general. Now, ignore for the moment any overall difference between the two groups in terms of how pro-social or how antisocial they are. Let's suppose both have decided to act pro-socially, say by getting somebody else a gift. Question: when would they want the other person to receive that gift? Well, people who prefer to spend, being more present-oriented, would likely get gifts that people could enjoy without delay. For example, they might splurge on a fancy meal at a restaurant tonight, perhaps without even considering the cost. In contrast, people who prefer to save would likely get gifts that other people could enjoy down the road sometime. For example, they might make a restaurant reservation for a few weeks in the future, perhaps after carefully considering all the available options. So here, people who prefer to spend might seem, right now, to be more pro-social than people who prefer to save. But as time goes by, the opposite would appear to be the case. So we suspect that one reason the Scrooge stereotype may exist is that one has to wait around to find out just how pro-social people who prefer to save are.
Can you tell me more about your proposed research?
Certainly. Our research has 3 stages, each with a clear-cut goal. So at stage 1, we begin by validating a questionnaire designed to quantify people's preference for saving or spending. We ensure that it's well constructed, we ensure that it predicts what it should. And once it's validated, we can use that questionnaire for the rest of our research. Then at stage 2, we'll correlate scores on our questionnaire with scores on other well-validated measures of personality. These measures will capture both nicer personality traits like agreeableness and benevolence, as well as darker personality traits like psychopathy and impulsivity. So here we will test our first hypothesis: is the Scrooge stereotype true or is its opposite true? And then finally at stage 3, participants play an economic game. In the game they have the choice of allocating funds, A, either to themselves or to others, or B, either now or in the future. So this allows us to test our second hypothesis. Are people who prefer to save more pro-social in the future?
How will the research funds be used?
We will allocate 1/3 of the funds to each of the 3 stages of our research. And at every stage, half the funds will be used to pay participants, and the other half will be used to employ a dedicated research analyst. Some of the participants will get online and some of them will recruit locally. And a research analyst will work 1 full day per week for 3 months to complete all stages of the research. And these stages will include things like research design, materials preparation, data analysis, paper write-up, and results dissemination. So at each stage we'll provide full lab notes on experiment.com so you can keep track of our progress.
How may I contribute?
Contributing is easy. In a web browser, type in experiment.com. This will take you to our crowdfunding website. Next, type the word Scrooge into our search bar. This will take you to our research project. Read through our description, and then if it interests you, click on Back This Project. You can then choose how much you wish to contribute and proceed to payment. I'm Dr. Aidan P. Gregg. Thank you very much.
Step this way, Mr. Cratchit, please.
It's only once a year, sir. It won't be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
I'm sure you were. Well, we won't beat about the bush, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, which leaves me no alternative but to raise your salary.